Welcome to data analysis session. My name is Lawrence Kusi, and I'm going to be a guide to you when it comes to data analysis in social science. To begin with, it is important we understand that to be successful as a researcher, your journey begins with the state of understanding the nature of the data that you are dealing with. If you understand your data, it will inform you as the type of statistical techniques that you have to apply, given the nature of the objective that you have formulated. It will also help you to test the various assumptions underlying the use of such statistical technique so that you can arrive at finding answers to the research questions that were posed in your study. So let's begin this session. One thing you have to understand is that when it comes to research, the basic idea is that we want to measure something. And if you cannot measure anything, you can never improve it. Therefore, one thing you have to understand is that everything that you do in research borders on measurement. And what do we measure? So that brings us to what we call a variable. Every study begins with a variable. And a variable is anything that can take on value. For instance, if I enter into a class and I want to know how I want to assess the level of performance of the student, there are certain things I can take into consideration before I can know their performance. For instance, I can check whether their age, class attendance, participation in class, and the credibility of the teacher or the professionalism in terms of the demonstration of teaching skills by the teacher has implications on the ability to study or not. So, for instance, if I ask of your age, you will tell me a number. So, age becomes a variable. And the value that we are talking about is the age that you have or you are. For instance, I'm 24 years old. Therefore, age becomes a variable and the value becomes the 24 that I've attached. In research context, we usually attach figures to variables, sometimes to demonstrate their level of threshold or just for identification purposes. So depending on the nature of data that we are dealing with, we can, or the values that we may assign to variables may have a true meaning, and sometimes the values that we assign to the variables may have no meaning at all. For instance, if I attach 1 to be male and 2 to be female, does it mean that females are 2 times bigger than the male? No. All that I simply wanted to do was to use the numbers to identify the variable called the gender or the sex. So that is variable. So certain variables are very easy to come by, whilst others are very difficult to come by. So if you look at what we call a construct, to be able to distinguish a construct from a variable, you should be able to understand that constructs are usually abstract in nature, and therefore to be able to measure them, we need to ask a series of questions, or we should have a series of items or indicators that will all come together to form them. For instance, if I say I want to look at customer satisfaction, what do I mean by customer satisfaction? Customer satisfaction can be measured in diverse ways, and therefore it amounts to what we call construct. For instance, I can look at their satisfaction with the price, I can look at the state of satisfaction with the quality, with the content, with the branding, with the brand name, and all those things. So you see, we cannot use a single item to measure it. So that makes it more of Construct. So we say construct is an abstract idea or underlying theme or subject matter that one wishes to measure using usually survey questions. So every research that we do and everything that we want to measure, we have to ask, are we measuring it as a variable or we are measuring it as a construct? These answers to these questions will help us in our choice for the right statistical tool and the setting of the objectives that we have to make in the research. Now that we have known the difference between variable and a construct, we have now tried to look at the four main measurement systems that we can use in measuring the various variables or the constructs that we are likely to encounter in our studies. So a measurement variable is an unknown attribute that measures a particular entity and can take on one or more values. And it is used for scientific research purposes. Sometimes too, variables may take on both qualitative as well as quantitative values in statistics. So there are four main levels of measurement systems that we can use to measure the various variables that we have in our research. You can visit these websites as have been attached so that they will give you more detailed information on the various issues that we are going to deal with. So let's begin with nominal measurement. What is a nominal variable? A nominal variable is a type of variable that is used to name, label, or categorize particular attributes that are being measured. For instance, if I talk about status of smoking, I can have smokers and non-smokers. Attachment of value 1 for a smoker and that of value 2 for non-smoker is just meant to help in classifying or labeling the smoking status of the respondents in the study. Therefore, the value that they take has no intrinsic ordering in terms of the categories of the variables. Examples of nominal variables may be gender. Of course, gender has two values, either male or female. Questions that have answers like yes and no, names, phone numbers, and the rest. Assignment of values to all these factors are only meant for classification purposes, and therefore they do not signal the magnitude of their score in terms of the number attached to them. Nominal variables provide categorical data. Therefore, we have to take note of that. And we cannot also find mean for categorical data. So if I may ask, what is the mean between male and female? Or between yes and no? Or between the various religious affiliation, being the Muslim, the Christian, or traditionalist, as if it is in the context of Ghana's religion. The next level is what we call ordinal level. Ordinal variables are variables that exhibit the characters of that of the nominal variables, but they also have extension. The extension is that they are built upon nominal scales by assigning numbers to objects to reflect a rank or ordering on an attribute. However, you have to take note that there is no standard method for ordering the variables. For instance, we can order the level of university education if you come to the University of Cape Coast at level 100, level 200, level 300, and level 400. Level 400s have spent more semesters, approximately 8 semesters, on campus, and therefore it is assumed that they are well versed on matters in higher education than those who have just started at level 100. We can also look at the classification of age, for instance, where in the social science studies we classify the various age ranges of our participants, maybe from 21 to 30, 31 to 40, 41 to 50, and then 51 and above. It means that the higher one gets to these categories, the more the magnitude of the score of age range that the person possesses. And that is a typical case of ordinal variable. Ordinal variables, like the nominal variables, also provide what we call categorical data. Let's go to the next one, which is the interval. The interval variable is a measurement variable that is used to define values measured along a scale, with each point placed at an equal distance from one another. We normally use interval variables in studies where the issues that are being studied are more abstract. For instance, if you want to look at employee job satisfaction, there is nothing visible or concrete that can be used to prove what we call employee job satisfaction. And therefore, we create a artificial continuum of scale that we think that can be used to measure the level of job satisfaction. Maybe you can place 1 as least satisfied, 2 slightly satisfied, 3 moderately satisfied, 4 satisfied, and 5 highly satisfied. Based on this artificial continuum that we have created for the magnitude of scores for the level of job satisfaction, the participants may be asked to place at the number that reflects their state of satisfaction. In this way, we have tried to use some subjective, even though analytically we see them as objective way in analyzing or in measuring the opinions of the participants about the variable called the job satisfaction. One thing we have to understand is that for interval variables, zero, absolute zero, is not a natural zero. In other words, when one scores zero on an interval variable, it does not mean the absence of it. For instance, if you measure the temperature of a room and you have 0 degrees Celsius or Fahrenheit, does it mean that there is no temperature in the room? We could as well have gotten negative 32 degrees Celsius or positive 55 degrees Celsius. They all take on value, and therefore if you score 0, it does not mean the absence of the variable. Interval variables are or provide what we call continuous data, just as the case of the ratio variable. Now let's look at what we mean by ratio variable. Ratio variable compared to that of interval variable sees 0 as natural, and therefore absence of it means there is no score of that variable. They also exhibit the characteristics of the interval variable in such a way that the higher the score, the higher the magnitude for the variable that is being measured. For instance, if you want to check the income level of students in University of Cape Coast, some may have no money or no income at all. So if they score 0, it means that 0 means there is no income. And therefore, such scores could also be measured or classified as decimals for the purposes of comparison. The skills variable is the highest form of variable that can be uh, measured in research, and like that of the interval variable, skill variable also provides um, continuous data from the perspective of statistical point of view. Now let's look at the summary of the variables and their implication for some um, central tendency measures that we have. For instance, we look at nominal variable here, the properties that it is meant for grouping, and the best central tendency measure is what we call mode. If you look at the ordinal variable, the property is on ordering the scores on the variables, and the best measure of central tendency could be mode or median and the rest. Then we also have an interval and ratio. For interval, their property is that they, they assume that there exist equal intervals between the scores. And the appropriate measure of central tendency could be mode, median, and mean. For ratio, they also believe in meaningful zero. The mode, median, and mean could be used for as a measure of central tendency. Thank you. I believe you have understood everything we just did, and I hope you will try to find more examples of variables that can be measured at the various levels of measurement and be able to classify the data that they will provide for us. Goodbye.